Angels of Us All. This is a story that takes place on an airplane. Not sure 100% if this story is all together, but I think it will benefit from a couple edits. This is the first edit since I wrote it live, so I haven't touched the story since it was first written live on stream. You are a brave person. Thank you. Alright. Angels of Us All by Jay Wilburn. Colton Wagner seized his sister by the shoulder a little harder than he intended to in order to try to calm her down in the window seat of the plane. Doing an airplane book. There you go. Yeah, it's just a short story, though, so we'll see. She kept babbling about something on the wing, but this was not the first time Tracy had been seeing things. It might have been the worst possible time for her to start up, though. You have to calm down. To Colton's knowledge, he had never been able to calm her down by simply telling her to do so, but he was scared and desperate. I'm already rubbing my arms going to... arms going, don't crash. There you go, there you go. Well, let's follow through and see what happens. Don't freak out. I'm sure the pilots are just fine in this story. We'll find out together. Someone needs to do something before it brings the whole plane. He clapped his hand over her mouth, pulling her away from the small port window and back against the cushioning of her seat. She tried to rake his hand away with her nails, drawing the slightest bit of blood through the scratches, but he fought her hands away and held on. If anyone else grabbed his sister this way, he'd kill them. Let's say, or at least he would want to. He couldn't let her finish a thought that could be mistaken as a threat to the plane, as opposed to one of her fits. Alright, I may have already said something like this later, but I think it needs to be in there. Colton wouldn't look, but he could see the movement of other passengers in their immediate area as they stirred and I don't want to use the word looked again, and craned their necks to see what the commotion was. There we go. Neither Colton nor Tracy were alive during 9/11. Colton had turned 18 just a few months before graduation, and Tracy was 17 this week. He wasn't sure which flyover state they were above now, between Mom's house on the East Coast and Dad's on the West. But, okay. These need to be capitalized because they're in the place of names. On the West, but they were still far from their destination. If the plane had to land early because of them, because of her, he was old enough to go to big boy jail now. They did not screw around with disruptions on planes. She was not calming down. He pulled his hand away quickly and quickly took her by the shoulders. Tracy, please, this is serious. You have to stop. You can't do this here. You just can't. She didn't scream, but after one more glance out the window and back at him, she said, don't you see it? No, I don't. Okay, now I need to capitalize the next sentence. No, I don't. This is only you again, and you have to stop. Just don't look. Don't look until it is over, and just trust me, okay? She was still crying and shaking as one call light went on across the aisle, and then two more ahead. This situation might already be beyond salvaging, he feared. More passengers started to talk among themselves. He could hear the anxiety in their tight voices. One passenger losing it was enough to set everyone off. I think you should put an action between don't look. Put an action between don't look. All right, let me take that under advisement. No, I don't. This is only you again. You have, well, I need to add one more thing. You have to stop. Don't look. Let's say he looked but saw nothing out there. No, I don't want that yet because that comes later. Let's say he looked but couldn't see anything from this angle. He knew nothing was there. Alright. Don't look until it is over and just trust me, okay? She was still crying and shaking as one call button, so forth and so on. More passengers started to talk among themselves. He could hear the anxiety in their tight voices. One passenger losing it was enough to set everyone off. Colton glanced up the aisle. A steward was already coming. He was a tall guy and had muscle. I'm sure he has hand muscles too, but that's not what I was saying. And had muscles showing through his sleeves. 2 phones rose up, ready to capture the exchange and turn Colton and his sister into some kind of YouTube or TikTok sensation. There was a whole category and hashtag for the scene about to go down. I'll say for the type of scene. About to go down. Drama on a plane was some people's favorite these days. All right. Other passengers ahead and behind opened their shades and started looking out for whatever had set off Tracy. Don't want to say Tracy off or off Tracy. I know, no, I don't want to do that. I know off Tracy is grammatically correct. I think I'll leave it like that. She had a bad episode back before the end of the school year. There was a close call during prom, but nothing like the freak out during the spring. And nothing like this. The plan was to wait until after they returned from California to start her on new meds. They were both about to pay for that choice. All right, continuing on. Before the steward arrived, 2 more women in uniform started down the aisle behind him. Tracy pulled free of her brother's grip and beat her fists against the plastic window with low thuds. Passengers across the aisle cried out. There was no way Tracy Wagner had the strength to break that window out, even at her worst, but just the idea that she seemed to be trying was going to require restraints. She was going to hurt herself in the struggle, maybe others too, and they would both be in trouble wherever they landed. "It's on the wing," she screamed. Tracy spewed out a string of curses that brought shock from people around. Some of them had kids. That was going to upset them even more. "It's trying to tear apart the plane." Several screams sounded off up and down the fuselage. This was becoming a full panic now. The muscular steward arrived and eyed the both of them as he held the seats and leaned down. Colton covered his face with both hands and rubbed until the skin burned. "Ma'am," the steward said with annoying authority. Someone in the seat ahead cried out, "Jesus Christ." Colton couldn't have agreed more. "What is that, Mommy?" a child asked in a shrill voice. He couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl, just that they were young and scared. "What's it doing?" A man with a deep voice joined the chorus from a few seats back. "Is anyone else seeing this? This is insane. Someone tell me what's going on." Very good. Does that need to have a comma? Let me see here. Someone, comma, tell me what's going on. I'm going to leave it. Colton uncovered his face and braced himself for what Tracy would do and how the crew would react. One of the women called out in one of the women in the trio of flight crew present. Let's say service crew. Flight crew is the people who fly the plane. The trio of service. One of the women in the trio of service crew present called out in a southern accent, "Everything is fine. We have this under control." Say, "If you say so." What's this guy's name? Colton thought. All right, there we go. We will italicize his thoughts. The steward stood up as well and projected his voice as he turned his head from one side to the other. Everyone calm down. Everything is all right. I tried that, Colton thought, the calm down thing. Oh, please make it stop, Tracy begged as she rocked forward and back at the end of her seatbelt, staring out her window. Colton regretted switching seats with her now. Make it stop before it tears us apart. What is that? A woman yelled. Someone explain this. The steward took a deep breath and leaned down. Ma'am, can you tell me your name, please? What's on the wing? Is that really a monster on the wing? Colton wanted to scream at his sister to shut her mouth. He had dealt with her and looked out for her as best he could all their lives. He couldn't help her here. He couldn't fix this before she tilted the situation past the point of no return. She would be sorry later, but later wasn't going to be soon enough. Oh God, it's tearing the plane apart. We're all going to die. Colton inhaled to yell at her. He thought he might even slap her. It worked in shows, but he doubted that would calm her down either. That was probably going to get him into restraints as well. But it wasn't Tracy talking now. Those last two decorations were from different voices on their side of the plane, but from other seats. Both those voices were men. The crew seemed to lose their focus on Tracy now. The shrill kids started yelling over and over, "Monster, monster, monster." Adult voices said similar things. "Get that thing off the wing before we all die." A few passengers from the other side unbuckled and crossed the aisle to look out the windows. Some of them started screaming with no words at all. The steward turned in a full circle, first one way, turned in, let's say, 2 full circles. 2 full circles, plural. First one way and then the other. Everyone. Before he could give his blanket instructions, the stewardess with the southern accent called him over from a set of empty seats a few rows up. "Drew, Kathy, come see this." They both moved up, too, and stared out the window without a word. Colton wasn't sure he could have heard them anyway, with the entire plane screaming and crying. He glanced at his sister beside him, who seemed to be the only other quiet passenger left now. Her eyes were squeezed shut, and she folded her knees up into her chest in the seat with her. She plugged her ears with her fingers and rocked back and forth. "Tracy?" He reached and touched her shoulder gently. She didn't pull away or overreact, but she let out a little squeak of fear. Drew, let's be specific here, we'll say the muscular steward spoke to the other woman loud enough for Colton to hear after all. "Go tell the captain." "Tell him what?" Kathy, the stewardess, demanded. "Exactly what we've seen." The stewardess with the southern accent rose up and pulled Kathy along with her. "And what the hell are we seeing?" Kathy wanted to know. Let's say clarify instead of know. Because she saw it out the window. She just doesn't understand what it is, apparently. "The plane is under attack," Drew said. He pitched his voice lower, and Colton would have missed the last bit along with all the other screaming passengers if he hadn't been looking right at the man's lips as he spoke. "Tell him to land the plane wherever he can as fast as he can, or it's going to go down all on its own." The women, needs to be plural. The women ran up through the aisle, shoving passengers out of their way. Drew stood and held out his hands, waving for the others to sit down, but not saying anything to encourage them to do so. Colton breathed out a few curses of his own. He kept his seat buckled, knowing if the thing Tracy had seen was real, then the plane might go down at any moment. He leaned out ahead of her, being careful not to touch her and set her off again. Outside, the sky was clear above them and brilliant blue. The clouds in the sky were below, white and fluffy. I'll say below the plane. I want to be specific here. Below the plane, white and fluffy. Through them and between the gaps, he could spy the colored shapes, let's say between the clusters of clouds and through the clusters of clouds and between the gaps, he could... No, I need to switch that. Between the clusters of clouds and through the gaps. Sorry about that. That's how editing works, though. You got to fix all these little things. All right, one more time. Between the clusters of clouds and through the gaps, he could spy the colored shapes of fields of crops below. Some of the fields were in circles instead of squares or rectangles. That seemed odd, but unimportant in the moment. All right, I like that little detail. But the wing was clear. The chaos of screaming passengers inside was a counterpoint to the utter peace outside the window. There was no monster. Nothing was tearing the wing apart. Everyone screamed at once. Colton jolted, but still saw nothing but smooth flying outside. Several people yelled about the engine. He could see both engines on that wing. Let's say under that wing. Under that wing, and they were fine. Fell right off the plane. The other one is burning. We're on fire. Drew pushed Colton aside so he could look out the window. Let's say past Tracy. This can't be happening. What's happening? Colton asked. Just stay seated, sir. Drew pulled away and ran up the aisle, knocking people flat who refused to stay in their seats. All right. Whoop. We jumped up to the other line. Okay. Stay in their seats. Some of them were getting knocked down for the second time. Okay, let me add something here. Colton imagined those passengers leaving snide reviews about the service. I don't get knocked down on other airlines. Here, they flattened me twice. No stars. Okay. We'll make that italicized so it's a thought he was having. Colton looked out the window again. It's still nothing. Tracy opened her eyes and stared into her brother's face. Is it over? He shrugged. I don't know. I still can't figure out what. He didn't know how to finish. She glanced out, started to shake, and hitched a few times with small sobs. What do you see? Colton asked. One of the engines is missing. The other is on fire. The other one is on fire. And that thing, it's still tearing us apart. What does it look like? He asked. What does it look like to you? She closed her eyes and went back to rocking. She took his hand and squeezed hard until his knuckles ached in her grasp. Let's say his knuckles whitened and ached in her grasp. I think that's a better detail. He allowed it. Colton glanced out again as other passengers screamed about the monster climbing on top of the plane. It's going to get in here with us, someone yelled. People hugged one another as they cowered in their seats. Passengers ran across the aisle en masse and stared out the opposing windows. It's over here now. It's going to rip the wing right off. We're going to fall from the sky. Colton couldn't see from all the bodies in the way, but he was sure if he looked out one of those windows, he would see nothing. Then the plane lurched downward, lifting Colton's stomach and stealing gravity for a moment. Everyone screamed. Tracy squeaked. More people clamored to their seats and buckled up again. The PA system clicked open live. A man's voice said, "This is the captain. We all see what is happening. I can't explain it either, but I'm getting us down on a runway in one piece. This is going to be a fast and furious landing, so you need to buckle in and assume crash position to protect your heads and to protect those you love." He clicked off. A few more buckled in, but not everyone. The plane lurched down again. Drew and his partners worked their way down the aisle, encouraging everyone to buckle in. They threatened others to get them moving, and he even bodily lifted one man nearly his own size from through the air and back into an empty seat. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. As the steward and stewardesses moved to buckle themselves into jump seats, Colton caught an angle through the window through the window. Okay, I'm going to need to put some commas here. Through the window, across at yet another pristine wing. This isn't happening. Tracy whined and muttered, "I can't believe it either." I'm going to add something else here. Why is this happening to us? All right, let me fix that to be spelled correctly. That wasn't what he meant, but he let it go. The plane shifted forward and down into a near dive. Screams drowned out. Yeah, that's correct. Drowned out with the high, strained roar of engine noise. Tracy squeezed harder. One man in a fine suit lifted up from his unbuckled seat and slammed hard into the ceiling. He floated in the air for a couple seconds before slamming down on the floor unconscious. His blood smeared the ceiling between lights. Several people heaved out their last meals. Only a couple managed to prepare a bag first. The plane leveled for a moment, and then the engines wound up again as they tilted into another partial dive. A woman in jeans and a plain sweatshirt with no writing on it stood up. She held a young girl that must have been her daughter. Who must have been her daughter? That is for objects. Who is for people? Who must have been her daughter? I'll leave that in for dialogue, but in narration it's grammatically correct to use who and that instead of just that. The woman walked calmly up the aisle. She stepped over the unconscious businessman. I think that may be a compound word, and it is. And turned into a space between rows of seats. There she started fumbling with the handles on the door. There was a frozen moment where everyone on board seemed to be holding their collective breath all at once. Colton told himself that those doors were locked. You couldn't open them like people did in movies. That wasn't real. Everyone started breathing again and yelled for her to stop. A few of them said things like, "Don't let it in here with us." The plane undulated through its rapid descent, and she rocked on her legs as she continued to work the door, say, with the terrified little girl in her arms. The girl was crying then and begging for her mother to stop. One of the levers shifted and rolled down with a pop and crash. Colton felt a change in pressure that popped his ears. Now some people got up and ran to her from both directions. Colton thought that wasn't anything he would do until he realized he was out of his seat and running ahead of the rest. Masks fell from the ceiling. Masks on cords of clear plastic tubing. All right, let me see if that works. Masks on cords of clear plastic tubing fell from the ceiling, and more people screamed than actually put them on. He tried to pull the woman backward with her daughter in her arms, but she kicked and fought with the same intensity he had seen from Tracy a time or two before. He ate a few more elbows from well-meaning passengers trying to help stop her. Or two. Colton came to a conclusion faster than the others. Maybe it was from dealing with Tracy all these years, but he knew there was no calming this person and no stopping her in time. Unlike the others around him, he shifted his effort to lifting the daughter out of the mother's arms and over her shoulder, away from the door. Okay. The girl tried to hold on at first as her mother used both hands to break the seals on the door. As the bulky hatch shifted outward and the wind picked up in force through the gap, several of the Good Samaritans backed off and retreated to their seats again. That actually helped Colton a little. As the door swung out on the open sky and a perfectly fine wing free of monsters out there, the girl pushed away from her mother instead of holding on. Colton pedaled backward, fighting to keep his feet under him as he clutched the girl and the earth tilted into view through that open door. The mom wavered, as if she might be reconsidering her mad choice, but then she took hold of the bulkhead on both sides and launched herself out the door. He tried to watch which way she went. Did she whip up and away from the diving plane, or did she plummet out of view? Maybe bounced off the wing where everyone saw some monster Colton Wagner could not perceive. His eyes watered from the violent wind, and she was just gone. And let's say the woman, because he's holding the girl, so we don't want her to think the girl's. And the woman was just gone, as if she were never there at all. The girl screamed and bawled. I don't know if that's the right kind of bawled when you're crying, though. B-A-L-L-E-D. I'll need to look that up. As Colton backed into his seat, he strapped her into the empty seat beside him and then buckled himself. His oxygen mask whipped around and hit him painfully in the eye. Air was getting thin as he finally got hold of it and strapped it over his mouth and nose. He tried to help his sister, but Tracy screamed and fought him off. He got a mask on the girl instead. I'll say on the little girl. Little girl instead. She cried out about something, but he couldn't make out the words. Tracy finally allowed him to help her, and they all breathed deeply of the fresh oxygen. Colton expected to see things, maybe even people, getting sucked out of that open door. It wasn't like that, though. It was very loud and windy, but nothing like in the movies, where everything goes flying out. Okay. Bald is more like an action saying I'm curled up. Ball, B-A-W-L. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. That's it. I had the wrong homophone. There's something about, like, every story has errors and you try to correct them in the editing, but there's something about homophone mistakes that make me feel dumber, so I always try to make sure I catch those, that I'm not using the wrong there or the wrong your or even the wrong bald in this case. Colton expected to see things, maybe even people getting sucked out, but where everything goes flying out. Okay, next paragraph. Tracy took a death grip on his hand again. He wasn't sure how he got loose from her the first time. Let's say his memory wasn't clear on that point. All right, very good. If he thought about it too much, there you go, he'd have stayed seated, and the girl, I don't know why there's two R's in there, and the girl would have gone flying with her mom. The girl gripped Colton's other hand almost as hard as Tracy. Let's say on the other side. All right, there we go. He blinked against the wind and tried to see out the windows on both sides. They were under the clouds and leveling out over the ground now. The wings were clear, all the engines were accounted for, nothing was on fire. He almost wished he could see what the others seemed to be able to see. It would almost make more sense if he could. The landing was surprisingly smooth, considering. Alright, now a scene break. I could have stopped it there, but I want to keep going. Tracy slept against his shoulder on one side. The orphaned girl was up and alert on the other, eating some cinnamon bun thing one of the staff had brought her. It was getting dark and they were still waiting. All their luggage, including carry-ons, were still on board as far as he knew. He'd gotten a couple texts out to both his parents. Lines seemed to be too busy to get calls out. Lines seemed to be too busy now to get calls out. Did the mom at least have a parachute? Let's just say she did. I didn't include that in the story, but let's just pretend she had a parachute. Everything's fine. All right. Lines seemed to be too busy now to get calls out, and subsequent texts were alerting as undelivered. The girl's name was Jennifer Drake. She seemed old enough, to remember. No, let's say no. Old enough to know basic details about her address and phone number. All right, let me see if I outdid that sentence now. Or made it worse. She seemed old enough to know basic details about her address and phone number, but couldn't remember any phone numbers to call. Let's say, comma. When... What's this guy's name? Colton. Sorry. When Colton asked. I'm old enough to remember my phone number, but I can't remember this character's name. Dad wasn't around. Colton's dad wasn't around. But oh no, I messed this up. I forgot what I was doing. He got the impression that the girl's dad wasn't around. Not in the picture. All right. So I took a sentence that worked and I messed it up. So let's see if I fixed it. He got the impression that the girl's dad wasn't around, not in the picture, but Colton couldn't tell if that meant dead or divorced. She might have been in shock still. Eventually, someone would take her away, and she would probably scream as she went, so they waited. Colton had caught a glimpse of the plane as it taxied away from this isolated terminal, presumably with all their stuff still on board. There was not a mark on it that he could see. "Did you see it?" Jennifer, the little girl, asked him. All right. This is where I'm not sure if the story's working or not, so I'll see if I can smooth out this last bit. It took him a moment to process. "The monster, you mean?" She nodded and then took another bite of cinnamon roll thing, talking over it. "My mom said she couldn't see it, then she jumped out." Colton chewed at the inside of his mouth. "Did you see it?" He thought she wasn't going to answer as she leaned against his side and set the half-eaten pastry in her lap. But then she said, "I did." "What did it look like to you, Jennifer?" "Hairy in some places, dark like a gorilla, but it was huge. Where it didn't have hair, it was shiny and rough like a dragon's skin. Big teeth, big enough to bite the plane. Big claws, big enough to rip the plane. And now my mom is out there with it." He didn't ask for any more detail. Something about the girl's cadence made it sound like a fairy tale story to him. It was a fairy tale from his perspective. Maybe the perspective of this poor girl's mom, too. If the woman couldn't see it, why do something crazy like she did? Alright. Last paragraph. Oof, I'm feeling her emotional trauma. There you go. Well, I guess that's what we try to accomplish with the stories, right? Colton took a deep breath and sat there with the girls leaning against both his sides. He suspected the girl's mother had escaped the hairy, scaly, toothy monster in the sky, but he didn't know how to tell her that.